2. All right, so it's 12:01 and we're going to start. People will join when they get here. Some are late, some are going to join midway through. But anyway, thank you again for coming to class number 4 in Backyard Oasis. And today I'm going to do my best to get through as many of the questions that I got. I got some excellent questions from the students here, and I was saying to Milen just before we got going, it took me about 3 hours to see if I could organize my head, get my head around all of these questions. They were really tough and good questions. That's the way it should be. But right now we're very fortunate to have a couple of our students, Amy and Greg, Alan, on the calls. Wave hi, Amy. And what Amy's going to present, with help from Greg and hopefully from me as well, is something very exciting, a project that they're planning to launch on S.Spring Island, which is, you've got Vancouver Island here and the mainland here, Vancouver here, and then you've got the Gulf, and you've got a bunch of islands there, of which one of the most beautiful is S.Spring Island, which clearly Amy and Greg really love. And I'm going to turn this over to Amy to present her slides in a couple of minutes. One of the aspects that I really was actually quite pleased about when Amy and Greg raised it with me was how to use bootstrap capital in a real estate context. And for those of you who are not familiar with the idea of bootstrap capital, more properly, I think, called self-capitalization, is how do you finance real estate today in what is essentially a real estate recession, and how do you do it maybe in some unconventional way? Self-capitalization is not often associated with real estate, but a very simple method of self-capitalization is, for example, where you ask the vendor or the seller for a vendor take back or seller take back mortgage, right? So maybe Amy and Greg could say, look, we're going to pay, I don't know, $900,000 for this property. Would you give us 20% or $180,000 as a seller take back or vendor take back second mortgage, postponable to first mortgage financing? So that maybe some of the financing for the deal can come from the actual deal itself and from the sellers. It's quite common. Now, a lot of sellers don't really understand that, and they think, oh my God, I'm cutting my price by 20%, but that's not accurate. When I started out as a young developer, I was basically I was a land developer. I was putting roads and water mains and sewers in, and then builders, often same age as me or a bit older, would come to me and say, Bruce, I would like to buy 100 lots from you. Back then, the lots might have cost $100,000 to buy. So $100,000 times 100, I think, is $10 million, right? So they would owe me $10 million. But a lot of the developers or builders didn't have $10 million of cash sitting in their drawer, right? So they would ask me for seller take back financing. And Amy, I love doing that. I thought that was great. And I'll tell you guys why. So they would put down, say, 25% in cash. So I would get $2.5 million out of the $10 million in cash. And then they would have some kind of bank financing for maybe another, $5 million. So that would be about $7.5 million that I would receive, right? $2.5 million with a $5 million first mortgage. And then I would supply them with $2.5 million vendor financing, which I would postpone to bona fide first mortgage financing. So that's how they would get their 10 million. 2.5 would come from me. And they would typically pay me back by selling their townhouses or their homes or whatever as they built them, right? Now, what I put in that, Amy and Greg, in my second mortgage was that if they default, I could foreclose on the property, get the property back in my name, and resell it. Right? And this didn't happen very often, but it did happen occasionally. So what would happen is I would sell it to somebody. I'd get $7.5 million. Maybe the deal goes sideways 2 years from now. They go bankrupt or something bad happens. I take the property back. You remember, I got their $2.5 million in cash right up front. And maybe by then the lots have gone from $100,000 each to $120,000. I get them back and I get to resell it. I actually make more money. Amy, are you following that story? And it doesn't matter whether it's just a $900,000 deal, a $10 million deal, a $500,000 deal. The principle is the same. the issue that you face is that a lot of realtors and sellers are not very sophisticated and they don't really understand it. But in the matter of secondary finance, it can be a very, very big profit center for a land developer like me. And I did a lot of that. Plus, of course, we went from a company, when I took over this company, this would have been a long time ago, 1983, it was doing $350,000 a year in total sales. So it was a very small company. But by 91 or 92, it was doing about $150 million a year. It's still not a huge company, but that's a lot more than 350,000. And some of the creative financing was part of that. All right, Amy, if you unmute yourself, I am going to share my screen, and I got a million things open. Oops, including some news. I've got a million things open, and I'm going to go to your slide deck here. All right, so just give me a second, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this. Amy, can you see the slide deck okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me good?
Perfect. All right, so let's tell us about how you got interested in Salt Spring Island and how this opportunity has evolved.
Well, we toured around all of BC actually for 2 years looking for our future home. And in this past summer, we accidentally landed on a boat on Salt Spring Island overnight.
Oh,
And there was just something about the feeling there that led us to explore it a little more. And then we flew back out and looked at a bunch of properties maybe a month ago for our honeymoon and fell in love with this one and initially wrote it off because it didn't meet our vision. And I wanted a huge property, 10 acres. I wanted to run big festival weddings. And then this idea came in to have this smaller property, which is 5 acres, and run smaller, more intimate weddings. And so the project overview, the idea that we have, we're negotiating for this property still, but our plan is to have 4 revenue streams from the property. So I'll be hosting intimate West Coast elopements, small weddings, vow renewals, and there will be accommodations on site because we found when we were looking for a different way to get married, there was a huge gap in the market, and I couldn't find anything like this where it was all one spot where you have your venue, you have accommodations, you have the wedding planner on site. I'm going to be certified to do the weddings for people. I'll become a marriage commissioner, so it'll all be in one place. And then when we're not having weddings, we will rent out the whole venue. So as an Airbnb or for retreats, reunions, bachelorette parties. And then we'll also have some annual long-term rentals on there eventually, so we can make some RV pads. We are planning to live in a yurt when we first get there. And so I kind of romanticize the hard start, and I think it'll be great. And then eventually that yurt, when we build our home in 3 years, we will rent the yurt out. So we'll add even more consistent monthly revenue. And so our first year, we've projected starting small, we'll make 130 for net operating income after expenses, and we have a cap rate of 13% we're projecting for the first year.
so Amy, I want to tell you that, I do a lot of work with event centers. I've been involved with the National Hockey League, and I do a little bit of work for some of the National Football League teams. I know something about wedding centers and putting on events, and you have identified correctly a huge gap in the marketplace. To me, it's incredible. I mean, I have clients who run wedding centers, and I have daughters who've been getting married, and you go to the event center. It's very nice. They have beautiful weddings there, but after the wedding ends, whatever time it ends, and that's it. There's no place to stay, and I think this is great. And as far as elopements go, I'm all in favor of that. It's a little bit less expensive it's a lot less expensive than, full-blown wedding. And I don't know if I ever mentioned to you, Amy and Greg, that my wife and I got married on Christmas Eve 40 years ago. And it was just me, my lawyer, my bride, and my mother-in-law, and the reverend, right? So that was the smallest elopement you could possibly arrange for. And there were reasons why we were doing that. But I think an elopement with 10 or 12 people would be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's what we found too. We were seeking it when we were getting married, and now we can create it.
And by the way, everyone join me in congratulating Greg and Amy. You can put your thumbs up, you know? There, thanks, Belen. Thanks, Greg. All right, next slide.
So here's a picture of the cottage that's already on site. We proposed the conditions to close on the 11th, and we wanted a closing date of December 18th. They're asking $939,000. So it's 5 acres of this lush, beautiful green forest. There's lots of privacy. We walked almost the perimeter of the land, so we know we won't be disturbing any neighbors. It's very private. The cottage is beautiful. It was built by the owners who still,
Yeah.
I think, still live there, or maybe they've just left, but they built it. It's very beautiful in these small details, the attention to every little micro section of the cottage. And we feel that the bride and groom, when they stay in this cottage, it will just feel so special for them to have this beautiful space. They can go outside and have their wedding. Their guests can stay on site, and then the bride and groom can come in or the couple can come in and stay in this cottage.
Yeah, well, you've sold me. My youngest daughter is not yet married. The two older daughters are, and she's met a very nice young man, an Englishman who I adore, and I'm hoping he'll pop the question. When he does, I'll mention elopements. 12 people or whatever. What would be the actual number you could accommodate?
I've been pondering that. Right now, the plan I have would be 10. I think we could probably go up to 20, but just
Oh,
they
well,
wouldn't all be able to stay on site
yeah.
at first, but most of them could. So it's zoned rural, which is great because it means we can actually within zoning have the cottage, build our primary residence. The cottage is allowed to be a B&B, where a lot of BC right now is cracking down on Airbnb rentals. S.Spring allows for a B&B if you live on site, and you're allowed to rent out 4 bedrooms. So our plan is to rent the 1 bedroom in the cottage as one of those 4, and then we want to build 3. The first year we want to build 3 glamping tents, and that would equal the 4 allowed. We will build an outdoor kitchen and an outdoor, have like a nice, chic, beautiful outhouse to go with those glamping tents. And then the B&B, it can host up to 10 guests, maybe 20 if the bride and groom request it, but I'll advertise around 10, and they can come and host their elopement or mini wedding on our property.
Now, Salt Spring is, I think, governed also by the Islands Trust as well, right?
Yeah.
And I found them pretty decent to deal with. I've had many dealings with them over the years. I think your view of zoning has come a long way in the last couple of months. Would you agree with that?
Yes. So when we first approached this whole plan, it was we had our plan written out, and we wanted to take it to Island Trust and get it approved. And then we have since found it's best to find how to word things in the right way. And they run on a complaint-driven basis. So as long as we're not disturbing anyone and there's no complaints put in, it's kind of like we've heard Salt Spring is a bit like the Wild Wild West. And you just do as you do. You don't need to register any businesses. You just show up and do your thing. But it's about having the right language and knowing the right way to word things or not word things, or what to have on the website and what not to have on the website.
So I want everybody just to focus for a minute on that, because when I first started talking to Amy, she was a different person. Like I'm talking like 2 months ago, right, Amy?
Yes,
Oh,
agreed.
and listen, this is one of the hardest things for people, all of us, to learn. I mean, I've been at this a long time, so I'm okay with it, but it's extremely difficult to explain to people that we as entrepreneurs make up our own rules. Now, a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, but that is in fact what a lot of entrepreneurs do. And I may have told you guys that my friend Joe Kowalski started a Wilderness Tours, which is a whitewater rafting business on the Ottawa River a generation ago, in fact, maybe 2 generations ago, and it's become a huge, successful business. But did he ask the province of Ontario, the province of Quebec, the federal government, the municipalities the counties, the townships for permission. Amy, do you think he asked for permission before he launched his first rafts?
No, definitely not.
He did not. He's an American from Pittsburgh. He came up here and he said, "Oh, the Ottawa River has force 3.5 and force 4 rapids. It's awesome." And he likes whitewater rafting. So he and his best friend, Robbie Rosenberger, showed up with 2 rafts. They asked a farmer upstream, "Can we put in here?" And they asked a farmer downstream, "Can we take out here?" And the farmer said, "Sure. What'll you give us for it?" And Joe said, "Well, I'll give your family a free ride." And they said, "Great." So that's how the wilderness tour started, Amy, just with 2 farmers. And had Mr. Kowalski asked, all of these regulatory bodies for permission, he would have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, which he didn't have, and 3 or 4 years of his life only to be told no. Today, Beachburg is a huge center for whitewater rafting and there's lots of other whitewater rafting companies in the area that are doing fantastically well, but all because Joe just put a couple of rafts in with his friend Robbie. That is a very hard thing for most people to understand, that we make our own rules. All right, let's go to the next slide.
Our first phase of our development plans will be from January to April, so the first 4 months, and we don't need a huge chunk to get going. Our funding that we're seeking right now, and we're doing all this bootstrapping, is really just to secure the property, and then we can get going on a very small budget, and we're planning to invest $40,000 into improvements to prepare for the 25 wedding season. So things like putting up the tents, the kitchen, the outhouse. We want to put in a hot tub, furnish the cottage really beautifully, get all the wedding furnishings. I love this like outdoor wedding vibe with like living room setups outdoors and the lighting, and
Yeah.
basically we want the vibe to be so inviting, but on a small budget. And there's 2 existing structures already, so we will just update them and upgrade them and make them pretty, and then as soon as we get to the property, we'll start renting that cottage as a B&B to make some income right away. And having the hot tub and it being winter, we're thinking should do fairly well. And then we will live on the property in our yurt for the beginning stages.
So one comment I think I may have made, Amy, is and far be it for me to tell you what to do. You'll make the decisions, of course, you and Greg. But I would rather have a wood-fired sauna than a hot tub. Just because wood fire, you probably have lots of wood energy on this property. And hot tubs, you have to keep them clean. I mean, obviously, you got all kinds of people going in there. If you have any kids, you never know. So a lot of people are going away from the hot tub idea, and they're going to the wood-fired sauna. And it's just a little bit of a different vibe to it. But I love everything that I'm seeing here.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We found some really great saunas, actually, some used ones on Facebook Marketplace for a pretty decent price.
Yeah. I have a number of people in the States and in Canada who are into this glamping thing in a big way, and they've all gone away from the hot tubs. It's just too much maintenance, too much chemicals, too much cleaning, too much energy. Wood-fired sauna is great. Mylène, you had a question. Do you want to fire away?
It's just a comment, actually. There's, at least in Winnipeg, it's called Ofuro Spa. And I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're cedar tubs. You don't use chemicals, but you empty and replenish the water. And you can get them with wood-fired source of heating. Anyway, it's just an idea.
Love it. Thank you.
Something else, Amy, that came in from Kim and also from Michael. Kim said, and I like this idea, you could have a wood-fired sauna or whatever, and cold plunges. I think people like that. And Michael put in a URL, and maybe Greg Allen, you could copy that out of the chat box. alphasauna.com. Michael's actually the distributor. Michael's one of our students. You can always reach out to him. Michael, can you would you mind putting your email in the chat box as well, so Greg Allen can copy that out? And he's a distributor, and he's somewhat self-aggrandized there and says it's a fantastic product, but I believe Michael. All right, so let's go on. Amy, this slide, tell us more.
Okay, so yeah, I mentioned the improvements already. We'll
I
spend
think you
about
have, yeah.
Yeah, we'll spend 40,000, and yeah,
That's great.
I
Okay, let's
explained
go to
all
the
that.
next one. All right.
Yeah. So the bootstrapping, we initially thought we would try and get some investors, and Bruce guided us to some great articles, and we read them all and pulled some ideas of how we would gain some capital. So we're in the process of pulling equity from one of our homes here in Saskatchewan. So we'll keep the home, Airbnb it, but pull the equity from it.
And do you want to just tell people what HELOC stands for?
Yeah, home equity line of credit. So you're basically borrowing against the equity on your home. So you get the funds as if you had sold it, but you still get to keep the home. So it's a great approach that we're going to use. We're in the process of that. We drafted a proposal and sent it out yesterday. We're seeking partners. We have 2 rental properties in Moose Jaw, and they do the one does very well. The other one I'm sure will do well because it has a hot tub in it. It will be the only one with a hot tub in Moose Jaw, and so we're seeking partners to come in, buy in on these 2 Airbnbs. So we'll still carry the mortgage, but then we'll offer a profit share each month, and then the partner would earn a monthly cash flow and a return on investment of 18 to 15% over. I mapped it out, and it will be over approximately two years. They'll get a monthly payment, and then by the end they'll have the return on investment of a minimum 18, and that should say 25%, sorry, 18 to 25%. And so we sent out that proposal yesterday just to a couple connections we have. We'll see what happens. We're planning on doing a soft launch of the wedding business. So essentially, I didn't plan to launch so soon, but after all this, I spent 2 days. Greg can testify to this. I did barely 8. I just sat in front of the computer, made the website, and now it's ready to go. And I have someone, I'm actually going to be paying someone on Fiverr, which I found I've used it often. And so someone on Fiverr I've paid, and they're going to be marketing for us on social media to our target audience. And essentially they can get on a call with me and I'll talk them through the process. We'll take a small deposit to book the wedding. And I have a feeling they'll book up fairly soon because most venues on Salt Spring and the island are booked up for all of 2025, taking bookings into 2026. So we just need to get in front of the right people. And then our plan is to book out next season before we even secure the property. And so that's why we will take this small $75 deposit just to secure their spot. And then as soon as we close, get the first payment of about, we were thinking around $3,000 for the first payment, which would just help us get started. And then another payment to come in February, and then the final payment to come before the wedding. So then we have some cash coming in those beginning months. Greg has been stepping out and making cold calls and outreach to take some art commissions and he completed his website. Very talented artist, but just wasn't getting in front of people, and now he is more so. This has pushed him to do that.
Amy, I'm just going to show the folks Greg's website. I am an art collector, Greg, and I was blown away by your art. And I'm not just saying it because you're on the call with us, okay? This is really fantastic. This is Greg's boulder art, and I can't believe it, but these are actually naturally occurring, and you can actually mount them on your wall. This is what he calls boulder art. His landscapes are unbelievable. I mean, they're a group of 7 landscapes, Greg, on steroids, or maybe on drugs. I don't know. And I mean, look at these landscapes, guys. I mean, they're fantastic. I'm sorry, Amy, I didn't mean to break your train of thought.
No, I love it. It's great.
I just thought it was, I mean, look at this stuff. I mean, I am, this is really fantastic. These are Canadian landscapes. Greg, where are these landscapes? Are these Saskatchewan landscapes, BC? Where are they?
Yeah, these Well, thanks for the kind words, by the way. Yeah, these are all based on basically one location in northern Saskatchewan. I have a wilderness cabin at Besnard Lake,
Wow.
and I've been going there since I was a kid, and now I'm one of the partners in the cabin there with two friends of mine, and yeah, this is all basically it's on the edge of the Canadian Shield, so either it's inspired by and more imaginative like some of these bottom ones here, or it's actually based on my photographs, and then I kind of put it down how I interpret it. So
I mean, I just, everybody is reacting, you know, if you look at the chat box, they're reacting, and it's just incredible. Yeah, Tina Ray's laughing, group of 7 on steroids. I said group of 7 on steroids, Tina Ray, or on drugs. And there you go. Greg, Dr. Yellen in Saskatoon is asking Amy if the opportunity for this investment in your 2 rental properties in Moose Jaw is available for RRSP funds. Can RRSP funds invest in this?
I don't know the answer to that.
So I think, Dr. Yellen, I think the answer is yes. I'm not 100% sure. You remember, I'm just a lowly engineer, not an accountant, but I think the answer is yes. If you have a self-directed RRSP, you know, you're really not supposed to invest in your own properties, but you are allowed to invest in third-party properties. And you know, I've done a little bit of that myself, and I know dozens of other people have. So, Amy, would you mind putting in the chat box your email address, and just in case somebody wants to reach out to you, if that's okay?
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you. All right. So that was, I'm not kidding, Greg Allen, that stuff is fantastic. One of the things I did tell Greg, I mean, in terms of small businesses and medium-sized businesses, I'm all about bootstrap capital and self-capitalization. And I had one senior that I know, she's based in North Carolina, and I did a little pro bono coaching with her. She had gotten divorced, and she had a very difficult divorce, and she was not doing very well financially. And so, Greg, I spent some time with her, and I think I emailed this to you and Amy, and it turns out that she likes to do portraits of pets. Okay, I prefer portraits of the Canadian landscape and those boulders and landscapes, but you know, there you go. So I said to her, well, that's very nice. Could you do you know, a portrait of a pet from a photograph? She said, sure. So lo and behold, she now has quite a thriving business where she will do a nice oil painting for you. It's not big, it's, you know, this size. A nice oil painting of your pet for you for $1,500 US. And she has dozens and dozens of commissions. And with all due respect, it doesn't take her very long. She's fast, you know, it would take me forever, but she's fast. And so she's making real, you know, and she's not young anymore. She would be close to my age, late 60s, I think. And she's doing very, very well. You know, people enjoy that. So I think, Greg, I mentioned to you again by email that you know, for Dunrobin Lake, which is a lake that took me 17 years to dig out, and it's a beautiful lake, you know, just it's a fantastic development now. I hired a local artist to, you know, I commissioned him to do a painting of Dunrobin Lake. It's one of my favorite paintings in my house. And this is, you know, 25 years ago. And I paid him $2,500, but today that would be a lot more. So I do think that there are landscapes, you know, maybe urban landscapes, I don't know, that people will commission. And so I think you can probably bootstrap a few things like that too. All right, let's go back to the slides if I can find them. Yeah, I think we're back here. Excuse me. I think we're almost through the slides. Amy, do you want to tell us about this one?
Oh yeah, so these are some images I pulled as inspiration of how we want to create the setting and the Oasis vibes.
I particularly like this one, Amy. Can you see my cursor moving around?
Yes, yeah.
You remember how Amy talked about I wouldn't call it an outhouse. Amy talked about, you know, having something, what did you call it earlier in your slides? Like,
Oh, I said like a chic outhouse.
yeah, we'll call chic, water closet. You know, architects
Mm.
love to refer to things as water closet. So this is a chic water closet. I have a client, Jabulani Winery, Elvie, are you on the call? Elvia, that is pretty nice. That's even nicer than what Jabulani does. But what Jabulani does is they just buy these sheds, nice sheds, and they put in a composting toilet. Would you have a composting toilet here or a flush toilet?
Yes, composting.
Yeah, so they put in a composting toilet there, and they have a sink like that, with a holding tank up here, sorry, a water tank up here and a holding tank here, and a foot pump so you can wash your hands afterwards. And you know, they run a winery and a wedding center, and Bridezilla goes there and they don't have any problem using it.
Great.
All right, so Elvie, if you're looking at that, that is even nicer than Jabulani. I'm going to steal that idea, Amy.
Yeah, this one definitely looks much more sleek.
It's fantastic.
You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, well, hang on a second, Elvia, take a picture of that, okay?
Yep, I got a screen grab.
Okay, thanks.
The
By the
property
way,
is,
sorry, Amy, by the way, nothing on this call is going any further than the class, but everybody on the class is going to steal ideas from each other.
it's great. I love sharing. It's how beauty is made. Mary asked if it has, it's not lakefront. It's about a 5-minute drive to the lake and maybe, yeah, 7 or 10 minutes to the ocean. We haven't mapped out the route yet. The next phase, May to September, we'll rent out the venue. I'll host 10 for the first year, and then we can also rent it out. I know there's other elopement companies or wedding planners that we can market to where they can bring their guests, and almost zero work for us, just initial setup, and then they basically rent the venue on their own. And then the third phase, when the wedding season is complete, in order to fill the venue and rent it out and still have that income, we're planning to market to artists, creatives, entrepreneurs, authors to come and have this creative escape. And then they have access to the spa Oasis that's already there, and everything's already set up for them. Or other people can rent it out the venue to host their own retreats, reunion, friends getaways, bachelorette parties. And then Greg eventually will have his own studio on site. So it'll be like a very nice cross-promotional thing where people can go and explore his art, which he'll have eventually throughout the whole property. We have all these ideas of how the whole property can serve as like almost like an art scavenger hunt where you're walking around and you're like, oh, wow, instead of green moss, there's, pink, this otherworldly moss, and just have different installations around the property.
I have a client, she's a single mom, and she has a beautiful cabin, very similar to what you're buying in Quebec. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. And she themes it as a romantic getaway, leave the kids at home. So it's really for mom and dad or, partners, whoever, to come and enjoy some time away and to spend time with their significant other. And Amy, the worse the weather gets, the more booked up she is. And Quebec has plenty of bad weather. I mean, Salt Spring Island, it might as well be Florida compared to Quebec. But I was amazed at the worse the weather gets, the more booked up she is. So I thought when I saw this, the October to December when the weather's not quite as good, I thought the plan was excellent.
Amazing.
All right. Amy, Dr. Yelland, who's not that far from you, he's in Saskatoon, is saying that he can help you with the accessing the container for your elegant WC.
Amazing. Thank you.
So
I will connect with you, Paul.
Yeah, so Dr. Yelland, Greg, can you put your email address in there? And
Sure.
Elvia, if you don't mind, you might grab Greg's address as well. He is an expert in storage containers. He really is. You might want to grab his email address as well. So the whole class can talk to each other. All right, over to you, Amy.
This is our 3-year sales forecast. So the first year, net operating income of 130,000. And so that's including the weddings, whole venue rentals, and renting out accommodations. And that brings the cap rate to 13%.
Amy, can I ask you another question?
Yes.
So what percentage of your gross revenue is operating expenses? I know you calculated that out. You know, I use a standard 34% goes out the window for operating expenses for rental properties, commercial. It's just a rule of thumb. What percentage of your gross operating income is going out the window for operating expenses?
I think I don't know offhand, but I think it might be in one of these slides where I broke down how I did the expenses. I hope I have it there. Okay, that's the first year. So I broke it down for down near the bottom half there, you have expenses. So I don't know the percentage, but it's 38,000. So
Okay, I'm gonna figure
total income of 169 and then expenses of about 38. So whatever that is.
I'm just figuring it out now. So you're about 23%.
Okay.
So what that tells me is that one of two things: either Amy is a very good operator, very efficient, or she's lying to herself. I'm going to go with the first. So I have some people who run storage businesses that have operating expenses that are in the low 20s like this. Okay, they're extremely good operators, very efficient, very effective. But most of us, including myself, are not that good. And so it might be higher. It might be, as I said, 34%. But 23% is an excellent number, and that should be a goal for you.
Yeah.
Now, if you go back to this slide, Amy, I see some unbelievable numbers in year 2 and year 3, and the cap rates are so high, you guys, that I'm reluctant to actually show them, and we're showing them obviously. But if Amy can really boost her cap rate from 13% to 35% or even higher, that is phenomenal. That's like not even a home run. It's going to Mars and back.
Yeah, the second year we plan to put in 3 more tents, so there'll be 6 tents, and then we'll build Greg's Art Studio that second year, so we'll have some more expenses. But the operations are very simple, so our expenses don't increase too much, and then our revenue can just continue to increase as we have more. We'll do more weddings the second year. We'll have more rentals the second year, and very similar operating expenses.
All right, so here is what the first year looks like, and this slide I think is legit. It's logical. It makes sense. A 13% cap rate is still a very, very good cap rate. I've said it many times in this class over the last few weeks that if the group bought a townhouse in Toronto for $2.7 million and rented it out, we'd be lucky to get a cap rate of 3%, probably be less than 2%. So 13% is very good. And if you could boost that into maybe into the 30s or even 40s, that's, like I said, it's a rocket ship.
Yeah, and here's the sales forecast for year 2 and 3 that I mentioned. So you can take a peek at that and see the income increases.
So look at guys, look at the bottom line. Now, Amy, the one thing that tells me this is not like crazy is that you know, I do get to look at some of the you know, the financial statements for some of my clients who run these kinds of facilities. Some of them quite a bit bigger than this, and they do have really, really strong income. They do, especially when they're well run like this. Okay, let's see what else we got. All right.
And
we're
then the
almost on
next few,
slides. Yeah.
yeah, these next few slides, they are all just some research that I've done on wedding trends and the increase in elopements, and basically proving my theory to ensure we're doing the right thing. And even things, some of the wedding trends coming up are couples are seeking more authentic ways to get married and going away from tradition and wanting a whole weekend experience, not just a one afternoon event, and a time to have this like nice, intimate, deep experience with their friends and family. So seems like we're on the right track with wedding trends.
So Amy, one of the young men I've known since he was a tiny boy wanted to get married on a Caribbean island. And the cost for each person to stay there and to enjoy the wedding per person was $4,500. And he was expecting close to 100 people. So you add up those numbers, you get to see the kind of, $500,000 spend that this was entailing. And it caused so much friction amongst the two families that the wedding has now been called off.
Yeah.
And, I mean, look, it's not my place. I'm not his father. I've just known him since he was a boy. It's not my place to tell him. But if it was me, I would grab my girl or not grab her, take my girlfriend, my fiance, and I'd do a $10,000 wedding or whatever it costs, and to me, family is the most important thing in my life. And I wouldn't allow my family or my wife's family to interrupt anything that would get in the way of developing that relationship. So I thought it was kind of like a tragedy in a way.
Yeah.
So I think you are on the right track.
Yeah. So continuing on there, the wedding industry was obviously hit hard during the pandemic, and now it seems to be back up to pre-pandemic levels. And it seems that the industry has been struggling to keep up when I was searching for places, everything seemed to book up more than a year in advance. So basically it's looking positive for us.
All right. I think that's great. Do we have any questions for Greg or for Amy before we move on? Maybe feel free to unmute yourself and fire away. We've got her here. Might as well ask. All right. We're going to get on to some of the questions that I got asked, and we got asked. One thing I sent to you guys this morning by email was an interesting thing I got from Michael Golubev, who's on the call, obviously, with us. And he was looking at a property of almost 200 acres, and I'll just show you the picture. And you will have this on your email. So I just wanted to point out something. So it was an interesting property, and Michael's obviously been somewhat inspired by this teeny tiny town backyard Oasis course, and he was looking at buying this really old beat up hunting cabin on 200 acres, and I think the asking price was in the mid 300s. Yeah, originally they were asking 600,000, but they lowered it to something like $360,000. But and he sent it to me and said, Bruce, what do you think of it? So the very first thing I did was, of course, I go on the MLS system and I see this picture. So here's the hunting cabin and there's 200 acres. And I thought, well, Michael, you're kind of on the right track, but you may notice something in this picture, which is there are high tension power lines not very far away from this cabin. All right. That's 200 volt high tension power lines. And if you know anything about human health, especially for children, but also for adults, being close to these high tension power lines probably has dramatic health impacts over long-term exposure. Could end up with leukemia or cancer, some other kinds of issues. So Michael wrote back, I guess, today saying that, yeah, he visited the place, he saw the high tension power lines, and he said, no, this isn't going to work. But one thing that I did do when I saw this was I did respond to him, and I sent him, and I've sent it to you as well. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. I sent to him and I sent to you guys, if you buy rural property like this, and 200 acres is quite a bit, and it has hardwood on there and good softwood on there, you can also operate a very successful woodlot. I think pretty much everybody on the call here is probably an environmentalist, and I would include myself in that. But there is nothing wrong with harvesting some trees on a sustainable basis. And another client of mine, also in the Ottawa area, has a smaller plot. It's about 50 acres, and he has about 5,000 trees. 5,000 trees on part of the property that is in actual fact a tree farm. And he grows certain types of hardwood and softwood, right? Some of it very fast growing, some of it slower. And he takes out a sustainable number of trees every year. He mills it for lumber, and he makes a ton of money from that, like a ton of money. And one of the things that I think some of the people on this call may be reacting, maybe sometimes a bit negative, is that what I think is nothing is sustainable unless it's also economically sustainable. Now, maybe people don't agree with that, but I can tell you in my experience, if people are hungry, if people are hard up for cash, human beings will do anything to feed their family, literally anything. And there are countries like Haiti where the forests have been chopped down for firewood and for sale. And the country's geography is just in a complete catastrophe, complete mess. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sustainable woodlot practices. And there was a little twist. I don't know if Robin is on the call. Yes, I see Robin is here. Robin loves tax issues. And again, I'm just the lowly engineer, not the tax attorney. But I learned from one of my very clever friends who has a sustainable woodlot that there's a difference between a city accountant and a rural accountant. He asked me, do you know the difference, Bruce? And this turns out to be Joe Kowalski, who is the founder of Wilderness Tours. He owns 5,500 acres on the Quebec side and the Ontario side of the Ottawa River, and he practices sustainable woodlot forestry. And the city accountant said, okay, well, you're selling $700,000 a year of trees and lumber from your property. That's income. You've got to pay tax on it. And Joe said, I'm not really sure about that. So he talked to an accountant who is up in Beachburg, and the rural accountant said, that city accountant is full of baloney. He said, what you have is you have a forest, and you're taking out some trees, a few trees every year, and that reduces the capital value of the property so that it's not income. It's just a reduction in the capital value of the property. If you ever sell that, you will have to declare that as a capital gain. But Joe has no intention of ever selling it. He's going to will it to his children and his grandchildren, and maybe they'll keep it as well. At some point, maybe if they sell it, there'll be some capital gains. But that could be 50 years from now, it could be 100 years from now. And meanwhile, for the last 35 or 40 years, Robin and everybody, Joe has been taking between $600,000 and $700,000 worth of wood out of his properties and paying $0 in tax. That is pretty impressive. All right. So if you have a woodlot, Greg, and Amy somewhere, whether it's Saskatchewan or British Columbia or wherever it is, it can be quite valuable. And there you go. And one more thing I would say too is I have a lot of experience with woodlots personally, and I can tell you if you harvest trees, the bigger, older trees, you make room for new growth. And trees do die just like people. They have longer lives, generally speaking, than human beings, but not all species. And so it's a very good thing for a forest to have regeneration and new growth. So even though we are environmentalists, we do have to be cognizant of some environmental concerns. Economic concerns, I meant to say. So that's what I wanted to point out for Michael. So Michael has to now look for another property, but knowing Michael, he's very resourceful. He'll find something. All right, I got a question from Tina Ray Sagley. This was really tough. How to resolve conflicts in groups. So let's say Amy and Greg are successful and they end up with, say, 3 or 4 investors in their properties, or Chris, who's a leader, ends up with 5 or 6 people in his group. How do you resolve conflict? And one of the things that I've talked about, quite endlessly in my career is there are legal remedies, but those are your last resort, in my opinion. To resolve conflict, there's three main things. Communicate, you communicate, right, Milan? Three things. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Legal recourse or legal agreements are your last resort. Having said that, if you, Amy and Greg have a group together to own these two rental properties in Moose Jaw, or Chris has a group together, you want to have a number of things. Hopefully you'll have a shareholders agreement. But again, in my opinion, your shareholders agreement should be 10 or 12 pages. Don't let your lawyer produce a 60, 70, or 80-page agreement. I won't even read those. And I think that's overdoing it. So you want to have a shareholders agreement. I think Tina Ray, you suggested a code of conduct. I think that's a great idea. And I sent you, Tina, an example of one I did with a client of mine. He runs a co-working or co-sharing space, and there's a code of conduct when you join that. So when you're in a group, I thought that was a great idea, Tina Ray. I'd never thought of it in addition to the shareholders agreement, but Chris O'Connell and you too, Greg and Amy, you might actually have a code of conduct that applies to shareholders. I thought that was great, or people who are enjoying the property. So that was a new thing to me today. Then the obvious thing too is to be flexible. And one of the things when I was much younger, is I would apply for a rezoning. And some of the community, for example, might say, well, we don't like this aspect of it. Or a local planner might say, I don't like this aspect of it. My reaction when I was in my late 20s and 30s and probably into my 40s was I want to get on my horse right over there, get a rope and hang these people, from the nearest lamppost. I'm kidding, of course, but that was certainly in my mind, right? Dreaming about that. And then one day, a local counselor took me aside. She was an elder, and she said, Bruce, I'm going to tell you something that's going to change your life. And she did. She said, you view every zoning application as a confrontation. You're just ready to put your dukes up and fight. And she was absolutely right. She said, why don't you view it instead as a process of affirmation? And I thought, wow, that's completely different. And so from then on, I did change. I do change. From then I changed, and I started to listen to the community. And I started to listen to my fellow shareholders and, and even to my board of directors, because I was a young fellow and I thought I was always right. It turns out I wasn't, right? And believe it or not, my projects got better, right? Now, they're not always better. The other ideas are not always better than my ideas. That's not true, but they can be, and we should be flexible and we should be open to that. And again, nothing is sustainable, either environmentally or any other way, unless it's also economically sustainable. So we have to keep that in mind too. And then I have found mediation to be extremely helpful where you have a fundamental difference of opinion. Really, it's almost impossible sometimes to bring parties together. I did a mediation. I don't do many, but I do a few with two Italian brothers who hated each other. It was so bad, I had to put them in separate rooms because I thought one of them might pull out a knife and start stabbing the other guy, or they'd stab each other. I mean, it was just terrible. And it was a 3.5-week mediation. They paid me to do it. And eventually we did resolve the matter. It took 3.5 weeks. It was very difficult. And I did not allow them, after the first day, I never allowed them to be back in the same room with each other. It was explosive. It was actually dangerous. I was thinking about hiring security. So what was the question here from Kim? Would you actually name someone to be the mediator, and would they have the last word? Kim, no. A mediator is not an arbitrator. So there's a difference. Arbitration, if you agree to binding arbitration, the arbitrator's decision is final and binding. That is the second resort, right? So I would go to mediation. If I was in an argument with you, Kim, never happened, but if I was, we would appoint a mediator. There you go. And it might be Chris. He's such a nice person, and he would mediate for hopefully a few hours rather than 3.5 weeks. We'd settle the matter there. If we fail, rather than go to litigation, we would appoint an arbitrator. You and I would agree on an arbitrator. Couldn't be Chris because he was our mediator. Who will ask Mary Ellen to do it. All right. But maybe I like Mary Ellen because she's my wife's best friend. And you think, well, no, Bruce, you know Mary Ellen. I don't really know her, and I'm not going to agree to that. So what would happen then? This is standard Ontario arbitration, Kim. You would select an arbitrator. Maybe Alex would do that. I would select Mary Ellen, and the two of them would select a third. And then the majority of that group would decide. It's much faster than litigation. You budget at least $30,000 for litigation. It's much faster, much less expensive, and generally results in very good decisions. And there's a little extra wrinkle there, Kim, that since you've asked, I'll finish it. The extra little wrinkle is that, so Mary Ellen is my arbitrator, and I think I said Alex is yours, and then there's a third one. And let's say we're arguing over the price of your shares. Okay, you think your shares are worth $100,000. I think they're worth $50,000. All right. So Mary Ellen, who's my selection, she says, I'm going to go with Bruce's $100,000. And your arbitrator, Alex, says, well, I want to be fair. I think they're worth somewhere between, the 50,000 and the 100,000. So I'm going to go at 65,000. And then the third impartial arbitrator goes 70,000. The outlier is thrown away, and it's an average of the two closest numbers. What that means is it drives everybody to a solution. So if you're ever going to get involved in an arbitration, guys, any of you, and it does happen, there are disagreements. This is a very powerful way of securing a result fairly quickly, and it's usually quite equitable. All right, so there you go. So I thought that was an excellent question. And I wanted to show you also something from Robin Chahal, who's on the call with us, and see if I can find it. I mean, there's so many questions. I hope I get through as many as I can here. I think this came from Robin. Yeah, I love this one. And it's about, I'll share my screen with you guys. It's about moving buildings. Robin, can you unmute yourself?
Yep.
All right. There's Robin. So Robin, tell us about this building. You're planning to move it, and tell us why.
Yep. So I have a neighbor who also owns this lot. So he's planning to knock down the building and build a brand new structure there. I've done a similar thing where there was an old house. I got a house mover to pick it up and take it to basically close to the St. Lawrence River, where someone bought the house and set up a new foundation for it. I like the idea of using this house as a coach house in my own backyard. So I live about 300 meters away from this, so we would never have to move on a major road. And just looking at the amount of material that goes to a landfill when a house is knocked down for something that's higher use, more economical, it's kind of a shame that the perfectly good kitchen cabinets that go to the dump, the perfectly good bathroom that goes to the dump, the perfectly good roof that goes to the dump. It's an opportunity to recycle it.
Yeah, so I awarded, you guys can see on the left-hand side of my screen here, I awarded Robin this morning the Green Laurel of October 17th for being green, for saving this building and saving another trip to the dump. So what Robin will do is he will hire a house moving. There are companies that do this, and they'll move this building about 270 meters into the backyard of his house, and it probably cost about $30,000 to move it. But to build, is this a 2-bedroom house, Robin?
It's a 3-bedroom house.
So, to build a 3-bedroom house would be at least $150,000, if not more. So a $30,000 move seems to be a reasonable thing to do. Then I asked you, Robin, by email, would you put in a full footing and foundation? And if you did that, would you put in an outside stair and an outside entrance to the basement?
I was actually thinking, so it looks like I need a variance to do it, but I like the idea of raising it up and then building a garage underneath it. So I could do slab on grade, have a garage underneath, have the house up above, so I'd have to put in a staircase. But there's nothing saying I can't have a heated garage. And then once building inspector goes away, maybe that turns into something else.
Yeah, so my suggestion to Robin, I wrote back to Robin here. This is so green, Robin. I present you with the honorary green laurel. I recycled a number of buildings myself, and you only have to move the house 270 meters. I asked this question, which I don't know the answer to. Do you actually have to lift any wires between this place and your place?
I don't think I do, but I got to walk it again and just double check.
All right.
If they do, yeah, we might have to cut the roof, but I don't think so.
Oh, don't cut the roof. You can get a permit to lift the wires. So don't do that. I think you probably will be able to move it the 270 meters. And if you have to lift one set of wires, it'll cost you money, but that'll be, don't screw with the structure. Okay. And then I asked him, can you put a full footing and foundation and I'm okay with raising it up a bit. That's fine. You know, it's called a high ranch bungalow. But if he puts in a separate entrance to the basement, you'll notice I said here, if you look at my little smiley face and you look at that, you know why. So does anybody want to unmute themselves, not you, Robin, and say, do you know why? Who wants to come on, you guys, unmute yourself.
Rental income.
Who is it? Kim, did you say?
Yeah, rental income.
Yeah.
Rent it out.
So, you know, my dad loved basements and he got me in the same thing. So if Robin has a full footing and foundation, I'd have a 9-foot ceiling height down there, Robin, and I would pull it out of the ground like you did. I wouldn't pull it way out of the ground. I'd pull it out half a level. So you only have to go half a level down and half a level up. And I would just say that's a footing and foundation. And, you know, you could put your mechanical room down there or whatever you need. But it might somehow become another office down there, a workshop. It could be another bedroom or two. So I would probably do that, Robin. And you're going to, you know, whether you do a slab on grade or you do a full footing and foundation, there is extra cost of excavation and building, but not a whole lot. Be the cheapest apartment you'll ever create or the cheapest workshop or extra office space. And because it has a separate entrance to the basement, it can be rented separately. All right. So that's what I would do. And the other thing I asked Robin is, can you move this, can you move this garage and put it on your site too?
For that one, I could try to get a variance for that. So I'd have issues over how much of the lot I can cover with building structures, but it would be a shame for that.
So one of the, well, just an idea. So one of the things I said to Robin is I've moved a number of buildings, so I'm going to give myself a green laurel. I moved the barn, which you guys know about. I moved, I had a couple of sales offices. One I turned into a summer office at one of my properties, and the other I used as a cottage. But I also had something to do, I don't know if you know this, Robin, I had something to do with the Aberdeen Pavilion.
I remember the story.
Okay, so this is the Aberdeen Pavilion as it looked about 30 years ago. This is a building in downtown Ottawa at Lansdowne Park. And you can see that the building was in very difficult circumstances. This is a typical city-run property. You remember how I've told you the enemy of a good landlord, a good property owner, is deferred maintenance. Well, the city of Ottawa is a completely worthless landowner, property owner. They allowed this historic 1890 building to degrade to the point where you can see it on the screen here. Inside, it is like a mechano set. It has over an acre clear span, which, Amy, are you still on the call? I don't know if Amy's still there.
He may have had to step out.
Okay, well, Greg, imagine, I mean, obviously you need the right zoning for it. Imagine if you had this historic building on your property in BC, what would that be worth in terms of a venue, right?
Yeah, amazing.
And this is what it looks like today, right? So it has been restored. But I'm going to tell you the story of how it ended up being restored. The city of Ottawa found out that to restore this building was back in the day, this is back in the 90s, was going to cost $5.5 million. So city council, city of Ottawa councilors voted to have the building demolished. The demolition budget was $350,000. The reconstruction budget, the renovation budget, was $5.5 million. So the city said, we're going to demolish this building. So I called up the mayor of Ottawa. Her name was Jackie Holtzman at the time. And I said to Jackie, it's a shame to take that building down and demolish it. It's a historic building. It's a monument. It's a beautiful building. And the engineering is spectacular, and the architecture. I said, how about if I came to Lansdowne Park, which is in the middle of Ottawa, and I will, with a crew, I will do exactly what I did with the barn dominium a generation later. I will take it apart piece by piece. I'll mark it and number and letter it. And when I build the Palladium, which is now Canadian Tire Center, I'll have a modern arena. I'm going to build this pavilion right next to it. So Greg, can you imagine, you have this beautiful 20,000 seat arena, and then you have this fabulous 1 acre enclosed space for events, you know, and weddings and whatever else, and bands and things like that. So you have something that was built in the 1890s with something that was built in the 1990s. I mean, I thought it would be a beautiful sort of composition. And so the mayor said, Bruce, would you write me a letter? You can save the city $350,000 worth of demolition costs. So I did. So I wrote the letter to the mayor, and 2 weeks later, she said to the city councilors, had a council meeting, look, Firestone is willing to come and save us $350,000 and, you know, demount the building and then put it up in Canada next to his new Palladium, his new arena. The councilors got furious. Oh, that, I can't repeat what they're saying. Oh, that's so-and-so Firestone. He's trying to steal our heritage. He's taking our building away from us. This is so, you know, and you should have seen the newspapers. I'm glad the internet wasn't where it is today back then, because you could see the headlines, Firestone trying to steal heritage from the citizens of Ottawa, ripping us off. Oh my God, I got roasted. So the city council voted to spend the $5.5 million to renovate the building. And of course, it's still a centerpiece of our heritage. And I'm taking full credit for that. All right. So where are you, Robin? You are now part of that group. All right. So save this house if you can. All right. Mary Ellen, you had a great question. I loved this. How to get started with tiny homes. All right. So, and I have something for you, I think. Yes. And again, I'm sorry if I don't get to all the questions today, but they were really good questions, and it took me quite a while to try and make sure that I could get through as many as I can. So I'm going to share this with me. But I love that question for Mary Ellen. She lives in an apartment in downtown Toronto. She's been there for a long time, and she would like to do something with tiny homes. But does she want to spend $700,000 or $900,000 to buy a property like Amy and Gregor are doing, or Chris and his group are doing, and then spend all the money to you know, fix it up and do something with it? So I asked myself the question, if she asked me, what is the simplest thing for people to do, the easiest way to get entry into this business? And so, Mary Ellen, this is kind of what I answered you by email, and I thought I'd show everybody else. The simplest thing to do is to do what Ron and Michelle have done. Now, in their case, they bought the noble tiny home from Humble Creek Homes, but it doesn't have to be, you know, from them. There are other tiny home builders, but you could find a tiny home that you like and that you feel you can afford, and you could buy that, provided that you had a land lease agreement with someone. So in the case of Ron and Michelle, they came to see me, and they wanted, and they do now have, a 60-month, a 5-year land lease from me, where they could park this thing. So they bought this thing, they park it on my site. They have a 60-month lease. I think they pay $600 or $650 a month, something like that. So it's not very much. And they just love where they're at. But this is the lowest possible entry. You don't have to spend $1 million on a piece of property and fixing it up and doing all the other stuff. They just hooked into our well and our septic system and our electrical system. And I put in the gravel pad for them. They didn't even have to worry about that. And they just, you know, the only thing that they did was they arranged to have it put on the site here, and then they had this deck built in this outdoor room. But that is probably the simplest and cheapest way to get involved in this industry and this business. Do you want to unmute yourself, Mary Ellen, and comment on that?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, you know what, I just want to say to the group, I'm just sitting here learning. And when I thought about taking this course, I said to Bruce, you know, I have reasonable rent. I don't have a car. This is going to be my home base. But you know, I have flexibility with my work, and I'm looking to, you know, be able to spend time in other locations, but also have a place where I could go, but also where I could rent out. But also what is important to me is that there's a sense of community, like a sense of community. So because, you know, I'm on my own, I'm independent, and I'm social. So I guess that's a part of the consideration. And I'm also wondering about just what the range of the price would be. And I guess one of my takeaways from, you know, tiny home versus, which is on wheels versus not, is I don't know if it really makes, like, how important, like a tiny home, you can move it on wheels, but, you know, when we talked today about moving it when it's not on wheels, those are just some initial thoughts.
Well, in terms of price points, I have a client in BC who just bought, or he's in the process of buying, a tiny home. It's obviously a used one for $10,000.
Wow.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I'm not exactly sure what the condition is. I'll know a little bit more, I think, next week, but that would be the lowest I've seen yet, Mary Ellen. And they go up to $300,000. You know, I work with Tumbleweed in I work with Tumbleweed and Sprout in the United States, and they're priced in U.S. currency anywhere from 180,000 to about 260,000, 265,000 U.S. dollars. I mean, the tiny homes are like RVs, but they're better than RVs. I think they're better built than RVs. You know, an RV will depreciate, and I think I've gone through with this class that I think tiny homes will actually appreciate in value because they're really built like homes, and certainly Humble Creek will build to the CSA standard. RVs are, you know, the rivets start popping, and within 7 years they're depreciated by quite a bit. So I think the price range is, you know, the lowest I've ever seen is $10,000, and the highest I think is about 265 US. So, you know, take your pick there. But I'm with you on that, Mary Ellen. You've heard me say that for Ron and Michelle, I don't think they're ever going to move that tiny home. If they decide they're going to retire, say in Arizona, which is a possibility, they'll simply sell that tiny home in situ, on a long-term land lease on my property, hopefully make a little bit of extra money, and just do it again in Arizona or wherever. So I think, you know, in terms of ease of entry, this is very important. Next week, I'm going to talk with help from Chris and Belen and Tina Ray and some others, and Luke, hopefully. We're going to talk about something that we're considering doing, which is creating a matchmaking service. Where people like yourself who are interested in the tiny home movement can register and say, hey, I'm interested in buying a tiny home and locating it somewhere. Anybody out there interested in hosting me, you know, providing me with a parking pad? And there might be some landowners who have land.
Yeah.
I have some sites on Lasqueti Island. And this week, actually, I talked to a couple of people who are interested in taking their tiny homes onto Lasqueti Island. One of them is a Chinese person from Beijing. I've been coaching him for a while, and his youngest son is now at UBC, and they would like to have sort of a sanctuary. And they love Lasqueti Island. And Lasqueti is a small island, and there's only 700 people there. But there's another group who also want to bring some tiny homes to Lasqueti, and they're in the counseling business. So if your family is having distress, or you're having problems maybe with alcohol or drugs, or you're having some other kinds of issues, they would do that. So a lot of people are very interested in the tiny house sort of industry, or movement is a better word, I think. But they don't necessarily want to spend $1 million or $500,000 or more on a piece of land. They just want to move their tiny houses there and conduct their whatever there it is that they're doing. Does that make any sense, Marielle?
Yeah, it does. And it does for sure. I guess one of the other considerations is, it's like, how often would I be able to use it? So being able to rent it out, and then, but when I'm not there, so, and it's on someone else's property, like, is it turnkey? Are there people that you, like property managers that you hire, someone that you hire to do that? So there's just a lot of.
I hear you. I'm not sure if that's the business you want to be in. I do have a client. She has in Idaho. She has something called the big potato. It literally is a 3.5 ton potato, and she this is a true story. She was responsible for a couple of years of promoting Idaho potatoes. So they built this huge concrete structure, which looks like a potato. They put it on a semi-trailer. She went all over the United States, and they show up, and people could go into the big potato and learn all the things about great Idaho potatoes. So at the end of the 2 years of moving around the United States, she was a young woman then. They said, well, okay, let's just the way we were talking with Robin, let's take the big potato to the dump and they'll crush it. And she said, well, what the heck with that? She bought about an acre of land outside of Boise. Yeah, Boise, Idaho. It's literally just a piece of desert. She bought a very cheap acre of land, and she had them put the big potato there, and she redid it as a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb. Okay. And so people could come from all over and stay in the big potato. And what she did was she put a little corral next to the big potato, and she put Dolly the sheep in there. And if you came, you got a bottle of wine, you and your partner got a bottle of wine, but you were required each day that you were there to go out and groom, Dolly, right? You didn't really have to feed her or water or anything else, but you had to go out and do that because she said, look, your heart rate will go down if you're not thinking about work, you're not thinking about all the troubles that you might have. So it became very famous. You can look it up, the big potato. And she did that on a shoestring budget. It was, maybe she spent 40 or 45,000 US dollars. It was very cheap. And then she went out and she found a fire station. You know how in some of the forests they have these very tall towers and the people are up there spotting fires? Well, they're being decommissioned all over the United States. And they were tearing them down. And she went to one of the national parks and said, I'd like to buy that. And they gave it to her for like $1, right? Well, sure, you can have it. And she put an Airbnb at the top of this thing. And it was she and her 70-year-old mom did all the work. Right? So there are lots of ideas out there, but the warning to you is if you're going to run the big potato or the forest ranger tower, that's a business.
Yeah.
They don't hire a property manager. My wife runs some Airbnbs and she's like a super host. And I think I've said to people on this call that if she ever to run off with a younger man, I would take all of our apartments off of Airbnb overnight, because it's a lot of work. And she's a mother and a grandmother and she loves taking care of her guests, but it's a lot of work. All right, so let's move on.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So another thing that came up, I think, was might have been you, I think it might have been Greg Yelland. And that is, or maybe it was Chris, I don't remember, it might have been Chris O'Connell. Do you finance something like these workshops that I'm so fond of in like one go, all right? In other words, let's say you were going to put together, you know, a site, and you know, if I had a tiny house, you know, Mary Ellen, I would probably have a workshop next to it, right? 160 square feet or less, right? Because I think people often want to stay. And I think Amy's onto this, and Greg Allen is onto this, where they want to stay, but not just to get married, but they might stay because, and they want a workshop where they could maybe work with 2 or 3 colleagues, you know, and they're working on some tech product or a new marketing initiative, or they're writing their great novel or whatever it is. So I really like the combination of tiny home and workshop. And I think that to me is the magic, you know, of the barn dominium. That is the magic. So if I were doing it, I would probably, in terms of the entry strategy, Mary Ellen, I would probably change it a little bit from what I said this morning. I probably had the tiny house and some kind of a small workshop, because Elvia found out that she could get workshops which were costing me over $30,000 for $21,000. So, you know, it's within the right price range, I think. But anyway, yesterday I think it was, Elvia and I worked on a spreadsheet, which I wanted to share with you guys today. And I'm kind of running out of time, and I apologize if I don't get to everybody. But I wanted to share with you guys this spreadsheet that Elvia and I worked on yesterday, and it's workshop financing. So Elvia has a project. I don't know if I have it open here. I can look at that later. Elvia has a really interesting project in a small town in Ontario where she's going to have some storage, some workshops, maybe some small offices, and some other things that she's got in her mind. The workshops are an important part of this initiative. And she's going to buy these things pretty much ready to go, insulated, and with the electrical all done for $21,000 plus HST. And if she were to finance each one with her lender, it would probably cost her, she might get 80% loan to value. In other words, get 80% of 21 grand. Probably today would pay 9% interest. A few years ago would have been less, and finance them over 7 years. So it would cost her principal and interest about $278 a month to finance that workshop. But these workshops rent, at least in my experience, for around $700 a month. So if you think about that, in a way, you're almost getting, you know, a free workshop, because it's really from the day that you buy it and install it and rent it, you know, you're making $300 or $400 a month on it, even though you financed it. And then I talked to her about something else, which will be new to, I think, most people on this call. It's called accretive financing. And Greg, this might be relevant, Greg Allen, this might be relevant to you. It certainly would be to Greg Yelland as well, and to others on the call. So let's say that Elvia does a deal with North Country Sheds to buy these workshops for $21,000 each. But she says, I want a $10,000 manufacturer's rebate. Probably all of you guys are familiar with the fact that if you bought a Ford 150, you can probably get a $7,500, maybe a $10,000 manufacturer's rebate from Ford. So the posted price, the contract price with North Country Sheds would be $31,000, which Elvia would have to pay. And then the day after, or a couple of days after, you know, she has purchased this shed, she would get a manufacturer's rebate from North Country Sheds of 10 grand. Now you might say, well, what the hell is, you're giving 10,000 extra and then you're taking it back? Does it make a difference? It makes a big difference. And first of all, I should tell you guys that the agreement of purchase and sale, we've done this, by the way, the agreement of purchase and sale will have all of this in there. We're not telling the bank, the lender, anything that's untrue. It's all in there. And it is standard in the RV business. If you buy an RV, they'll do this. You buy a truck, they'll do this. You buy a boat, they'll do this. Why not a workshop or a tiny home? Okay. So now let's say we have an agreement of purchase or sale, which contains all of the information in it, but the posted price is 31 grand. And you get 80% loan to value financing, which means you get $24,800 of financing, which means that the day after you buy this thing, you have $3,800 more cash on hand than the day before. Okay, well, and that $3,800 you can use for any number of things, right? Now you might say, oh my God, you've just increased your financing from $278 a month to $410 a month, but you're still well within, in terms of loan to value, you're still well within the $700 in rent. So you're not going to go bankrupt doing this. But if you did 100 units like this, I'm not saying you would do 100, but if you did 100 units like this, you would end up with, you bought 100 units. I'm not saying you should buy 100, but you would end up with, the day after your closing, you'd end up with $380,000. So you could go on a trip to Las Vegas and have some fun. Right? All right. So, I mean, obviously you wouldn't do that. I'm not recommending that, but this is a very common thing. You might say, oh, well, this looks really kind of dodgy, but I wanted to show you, I think I have it here. Yeah, I do. I wanted to show you an example of this that I'm very familiar with. And I just wanted to prove to you, and this, I'm afraid, will have to be the last thing that we do today. I wanted to show you that it's not just small entrepreneurs like me and others doing this kind of accretive financing. This is a true story of how Disney operates. And Disney's a much, much bigger company than probably any of us on this call, or maybe all of us on this call times 1,000, right? So I helped Disney buy the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. It was an expansion franchise in the 1990s. I was on the NHL committee that admitted new teams. And Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney, came to see the committee, and he was petitioning the NHL to grant a franchise to Anaheim, California, and it was going to be called the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. Today it's just called the Ducks. They dropped the Mighty. But so they did, they were successful, and we wanted them as NHL owners, we wanted them to be a partner in the NHL. The purchase price back then was $50 million. Today would be about $1 billion or $1.5 billion. But in the 90s, the purchase price of an NHL expansion franchise was $50 million US. Disney negotiated hard. They're a tough group. And they agreed to pay $25 million up front. And the other $25 million, they would pay $5 million a year for 5 years. So Greg Allen, that's like a vendor take back, right? Do you understand that? It's very similar to what I'm suggesting, maybe 20%, you know, in their case, they got 50% as a quote vendor take back or seller take back mortgage. And I'm recommending maybe you and Amy can get 20%, right? But so trust me on it, it's not just us as small entrepreneurs doing this. Very large companies. Warren Buffett has done this probably hundreds of times. So anyway, so they paid $50 million for the franchise, $25 million up front, and $5 million a year for 5 years. Then Disney took the franchise and put it into their debt capital, and they got 50% of the value of the franchise, an increase basically in their line of credit. So they got a $25 million boost in their credit facilities. And they got a $30 million leasing inducement from the owner of the Honda Center. This is the Honda Center on the right-hand side of the screen where the Ducks play. All right. So they got $30 million from the owner of the Honda Center, which was Ogden Corporation. And I knew the Ogden people very well. So if you run through these numbers, the day after they bought the NHL franchise, they had an extra $25 million of cash. All right. That is amazing financing. And just so you know, the Disney company is just like you or me. And for the people on this call, you know, the Disney company is no different from what I have said. They don't invest in any project that isn't economically sustainable, right? They insist on that, and they have great discipline, and their target is a minimum of 22%. Okay, that's not a cap rate, that's an internal rate of return, which is a little different. Okay, so I got through some of the questions. I apologize, not all of the questions. Is there anything else before we break for the day? You guys can unmute yourself and say whatever. We got.
Hi, Bruce. It's
Who's
Tina
that?
Ray.
Oh, hey,
It's Tina
Tina.
Ray. I can't get my video to work, but I was just wondering if Tosh Serafini got approval for his tiny house in the backyard on Cavan.
I was hoping that oh, maybe, yeah, look, Simon is there. Simon, can you unmute yourself?
Hey everyone. So yeah, so no news yet on Cavan. The city absolutely hates updating us, but that is something that we're diligent weekly on trying to get upgrades on or updates on. That's going to be a game changer locally.
So what Tina Ray is asking is, will the Noble be approved for backyard coach houses? And if Mary Ellen is still with us, I'm not sure she is, but if Mary Ellen were still with us, you know, that is a game changer. If we can get it approved for backyards in Ottawa, following the Portland, Oregon example, maybe Toronto will follow. And, you know, if we want to provide an extra 500,000 spots for people to live affordably, boy, it's just an absolute no-brainer. So Simon, I'm glad Tina Ray asked that question, because I'll ask that every time I see it, right?
Between
Thank
getting the permit for Cavan and our episode on Dragon's Den, you will all be the first one to hear the second we hear.
All right.
When is Dragon's Den?
We have no idea yet. We're checking every week to see if we have an update on when the episode's coming, but it's 100% this season.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. So is there anything else before we go? Thank you for that, Tina Ray. I really appreciate everybody sticking with me right to the bitter end today. I know it was a little bit disjointed, and I hope to see you all next Thursday. And thanks again.